Just watch the mountain here.
Right,
We gotta keep it coming way down. Coming down fast.
You handle the power.
Okay, let's start our right turn.
Quito, Ecuador, and as an airplane arrives from San Diego, it's cause for celebration. The San Diego pilot is greeted like a visiting dignitary and treated like a head of state.
Mi general, un gustazo estar con usted.
All along the journey, at every stop, it's been this way. There are speeches of welcome.
Having such a beautiful expression of goodwill and friendship it lifts our spirits.
And news conferences, it's all over the media in South America.
Quiero darle las gracias a ustedes por darnos esta bienvenida.
There are official receptions so warm, any diplomat would consider them a triumph.
Y buenas vidas a Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias, señor embajador.
But how did this happen? How did this San Diego man, flying with his sons, create so much attention and so much good feeling so far away from home? And why is this remarkable trip such an emotional experience for all of them?
An NBC 739 special, Flight of Ecuador 3. A dream takes wing. Here's NBC 739's Ken Kramer.
Imagine you inherited something. I don't mean a house or a car, I mean a legacy. Your father did something so remarkable it was in the headlines 75 years ago. Indeed, it was a daring thing to do in 1931.
Remember, this is just a few years after Charles Lindbergh made history flying across the Atlantic, so pioneering aviators were heroes of the day when a San Diegan named Theodore Gildred took off from Lindbergh Field in a little plane determined to fly all the way to Ecuador.
You know, flying in the weather and with no charts or maps to speak of, no radios, and how he got there still amazes me today.
By compass and following highways and railroads, it took him 18 days. And in Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, all along the way, wherever he stopped, he was greeted by political and business leaders, and at each place, he took the time to greet them on behalf of San Diego. He was like a flying ambassador, and it opened lines of communication between our city and cities in Mexico, Central and South America. When he finally arrived in Quito, Ecuador, it was 10:52 in the morning. He made a low pass over the airport before landing, and it was like a holiday. He ended up donating his plane, and it established the first airmail service in that country. For generations to come, Ted Gildred's flight would be remembered in every place he had visited along his route, but especially in Quito. That was 1931. 1981 now, 50 years after that historic flight, and Ted Gildred's son, Theodore Gildred II, who is also a pilot, decides he's going to duplicate what his dad had done.
We wanted in 1981 to recreate the 1931 flight to the minute. We had my dad's logbooks, so we knew exactly when he had left from each point, at what time he'd left, and when he arrived.
No, he won't be flying in the same kind of plane as his dad, but it's an historic aircraft to be sure, named the Ecuador II. It's a Stinson 1942 Reliant from the San Diego Aerospace Museum, and as it was to turn out, the flight wasn't any piece of cake. 100 miles out from Mexico City, tiny Ecuador II develops a serious vibration and begins to lose power and altitude. And there's air turbulence that every now and then knocks the plane around.
When it comes, though, it's very bad.
In the chase plane, the pilot is looking for an emergency landing place in case it comes to that. He radios ahead to Mexico City.
Has developed engine trouble, and we will accompany it.
It's a nail-biter, but Ecuador II makes it to Mexico City. But the little plane's engine continues to struggle over the next legs of the flight: Guatemala, Costa Rica, and the mountains of Nicaragua. Finally, in Panama, the decision is made to do a complete overhaul. The problem ends up being a broken valve.
Totally damaged the top of that piston.
Repairs were made, though, and remarkably, the flight of Ecuador 2 kept to schedule and touched down in Quito with Ted Gildred II at the controls at 10:52 a.m., exactly 50 years to the minute after his father had made history doing it.
I had the most amazing feeling that my dad really was there, and I started crying. Tears were coming down my eyes. I couldn't help myself.
And like his father before him, Ted Gildred gives the tiny airplane to Ecuador, along with money to help establish an aviation museum in Quito. That was 1981. 2006. It's now 75 years since his father flew to Ecuador, 25 years since he duplicated the trip. Ted Gildred has had some health issues, but he's overcome them.
I realized how lucky I was that the good Lord had given me more time to recreate this flight once more.
That's right, Ted Gildred was determined to do it again, fly to Ecuador again, reestablish those contacts again, honor his aviation pioneering dad again. Only this time, he would have some help.
Obviously, we all know about Charles Lindbergh and all that, but I didn't know about this particular feat.
Jay Leno joins in to help. Eric Lindbergh agrees to make the trip too.
Charles Lindbergh, his grandfather, had been the inspiration for my father's flight from San Diego to Quito, Ecuador in 1931.
And Ted Gildred's own sons, Ted III and Steve and Ed, are coming as well. It will be a flight linking 2 continents and 3 generations. And buckle up, because we're going to go along too.
We're about to go from San Diego to Quito, Ecuador. A sentimental journey, yes, but also some poignant moments and beautiful sights. And unlike 25 or 75 years ago, this flight has some pretty dazzling technology, as you're about to see. A flight from San Diego to Quito, Ecuador. Happens all the time, but not like this. We're about to go along on an adventure, one of friendship and of history.
His father did it in 1931, flew all the way to Ecuador, exchanging greetings and messages of goodwill from San Diego. He did it 50 years later in a tiny historic airplane, and now, 75 years later, San Diegan Ted Gildred, the former ambassador to Argentina, the man who started San Diego's Institute of the Americas to study and improve relations between Latin America and the United States, a diplomat by profession with a passion for flying, is determined to do it yet again, with his own sons this time, and with the grandson of Charles Lindbergh. It's going to be a terrific flight with some sensational support. The Tonight Show's Jay Leno comes to do a fundraiser.
And I thought it was interesting how the family is recreating it and doing it over and over again, and it's goodwill and it's fun.
Thank you all for being here. We're looking forward to a fantastic flight. And again, thanks San Diego. We'll try to represent you well.
It's departure day from San Diego's Lindbergh Field. The journey will cover 4,200 miles from San Diego to Mexico City, to Guatemala City, to Managua in Nicaragua, then to Costa Rica, Panama, and finally Quito. This trip will be made in comfort in a fully pressurized 9-passenger Pilatus turboprop that can cruise at 300 miles an hour at 30,000 feet.
3 Kilo Mike, contact T1 approach 126.5.
NBC 739 photographer Dave Smith is riding in an identical chase plane provided by Pilatus Aircraft of Switzerland. Compared to the first flight 75 years ago, the journey will be accompanied by every kind of navigational aid equal to that of an airliner.
1 Papa Charlie, proceed direct to Tijuana and climb maintain 14,000, 14,000.
Along the Baja coast, a fuel stop at San Jose del Cabo, then across the mainland of Mexico. As easy as technology is making the flight so far, there are some things that are unchanged from earlier flights of 25 or even 75 years ago. It is still an international mission of friendship, Ted Gildred is a respected friend throughout Mexico and Latin America. That's clear the moment Ecuador 3 arrives in Mexico City. Because of that friendship, and because he's repeating what his father did, he gets a lot of media attention in the country.
75 years ago, and doing a trip like this, it wasn't easy. So it's a privilege and an honor for us here in Mexico, and we welcome the ambassador and the goodwill.
It is, in truth, the warmest of greetings.
Welcome back to Mexico, sir. Congratulations on your trip. Congratulations to your compañeros. And I wish you all the best in the rest of your historic journey.
It's renewing what had been established in the past. Those two previous trips, they laid the groundwork. In the world of diplomacy and international relations, this is how things are done among friends.
Me va a hacer llorar.
No, bienvenido, de veras. Bienvenido.
In 1931 and 1981, the trip from Mexico City to Guatemala presented huge and forbidding obstacles. But this trip isn't meant to be an aeronautical challenge, it's a journey of remembrance. And as Ecuador 3 lands at Guatemala City, you can imagine what Ted Gildred's father, flying from San Diego, must have felt as he arrived in this country 75 years ago.
Martin Keller, welcome to Guatemala.
Those earlier flights are remembered here, as well as a visit decades ago from Charles Lindbergh, Eric's grandfather. There's a picture of that occasion.
He looks a little tense.
There are the official greetings.
Hace ya 75 años, el papá del embajador Gildred.
Then there's a presentation. Ted Gildred has brought a key to the city of San Diego.
Siempre tengamos mejores y mejores relaciones con este gran país de Guatemala.
Agradezco su gentileza. Qué notable.
Gracias.
In a world so filled with tension, where everything moves so fast, here was a really good thing, and certainly a moment to savor.
This trip and this ski in particular is a symbol of this unity that has to be maintained, not only economically but politically.
In 1981, it was a worrisome stop because our relations with Nicaragua were not good at all. As a matter of fact, I had to get special permission.
The Sandinistas were concerned that it might be some kind of propaganda trip, but there were assurances that it was simply a son recreating his father's pioneering journey, and permission was granted. This time, the reception is warm, and Ted Gildred is honored for what he and his family have done for relations between San Diego and Latin America.
I think that the more exchanges we can have, the more that we demonstrate that there's shared interest and shared values between the U.S. and this part of the world. I think that's all enormously positive.
There's the freedom and the time to have a little fun, do a little shopping. In this case, get a new wallet.
After this flight, it is going to look like that.
But there is still much of this flight ahead.
Through all of this, of course, the crew has to work hard to make sure that everything is right on time in order to duplicate the arrival in Quito just as it was 75 years ago to the minute. Still to come, a huge reception, some stormy skies, and a tearful reunion. San Diegan Ted Gildred is recreating a journey his father made 75 years ago. It's a flight from San Diego to Quito, Ecuador. And at each stop along the way, the excitement is building, and in this case, so is the reception. It's San Jose, Costa Rica. School children have heard about the flight and the history behind it. There's the chance to go through the plane. Ted Gildred III has accompanied his father, as has Eric Lindbergh.
A retrospective flight like this is really an extraordinary way to reach out and touch people, and what better way to make friends?
And like his father before him, Ted receives the official welcome accorded visiting dignitaries. It's a relationship between friends and nations renewed.
Ustedes son amigos y nosotros sentimos siempre que son amigos nuestros. Gracias.
Ahead is the next to last stop, Panama City. Here, 25 years ago, Ted's plane, having limped over the mountains, needed a complete engine overhaul or it might not have made it safely to Quito. But on this trip, there is time to see things like the workings of the Panama Canal.
Uno, dos, tres.
Time to meet some people who have memories of those earlier trips.
And what's been fun about this is that it has brought out of the woodwork all of these people that have recollections of Ambassador Gildred's father and his previous flights here to Panama.
And there's something else, a respect among the people of Latin America for the very act of being true to one's family, of honoring your parents.
In the United States, often I'll get, oh, he was this famous guy, how cool, blah, blah, blah. Down here, it's more, he's your grandfather, and it's very important from a familial sense, and I really appreciate that.
That you're honoring him.
At an embassy reception later, when the United States ambassador to Panama talks about shared values, that's one of the things he means.
Bienvenidos, señor embajador.
It's now the day this whole trip has been pointing to, for the landing to be made at Ecuador to be just exactly 75 years to the minute that his dad did it. Ted Gildred is going to have to plan his departure from Panama, his flight, and his arrival just perfectly, and have a little help from air traffic controllers and from Mother Nature.
We had heard that the weather was not very good at Quito.
Could a trip that was born of such good intentions and blessed with such good fortune now be in for a rough ride?
All the planning, all the preparation, all the expectation, all the tradition, it's all coming down to just one last flight. Any way you look at it, it's going to be exciting as Ecuador 3 makes its final approach. It's the big day. 4,000 miles, months of planning, 3/4 of a century of tradition, and it's all coming down to this, the final leg of the flight into Quito.
75 years ago, Ted Gildred's father made aviation history by flying from San Diego to Ecuador. 25 years ago, Ted himself made the same trip, landing at exactly the same time his father had.
We took off, I think, at just about now. Actually 6:30, a little bit before, and we got there at about 10:30 and circled the city and landed at 10:52, and we're going to do it again today.
That last time in 1981, he was at the controls of an historic 1942 Stinson, and it was a tough flight. Plagued by engine troubles, the airplane barely cleared the mountains. This time, it's a modern pressurized Pilatus PC-12, but for the plane to touch down in Quito right at 10:52, the weather's going to have to cooperate, and right now, the skies are darkening. At the airport, a crowd is gathering along both sides of the taxiway. In Ecuador 3, it's a bumpy ride, but descending through the clouds and light rain, there appear on either side of the Pilatus an honor guard of 2 Ecuadorian Air Force fighter jets. They will escort the plane into Quito.
Ecuador Air Force, 3 kilometers.
Just minutes to touchdown.
What's your time? I'm showing 41 on my watch. UTC, this is perfect here.
The weather had not been promising.
But amazingly, when we arrived over the city, just all of a sudden the skies opened up.
From the tower, permission for a flyover, just as his dad had done.
Yes, sir. Now we request to do a low approach over the airport at 200 feet, please.
Affirmative, sir.
And we pulled up after doing the pass, and these 2 jets crossed over right behind us.
Now on final and right on time.
Saludos, Ecuador!
It was as if my dad was up there saying, son, you did it, and thanks for bringing my grandsons down. Bienvenido, ah, muchas gracias.
History is honored, the cycle is completed. But there is one more stop to be made, and it will be an emotional one, to the Quito Aeronautical Museum. The first exhibit you see there is Ecuador 2, the very aircraft Ted Gildred flew here 25 years ago.
You know, I thought, holy cow, there's the airplane that damn near killed me, and I still love it. And I went over and I gave the cowl a great big hug. Hi.
It would be easy to say this was a personal journey, a family tradition kept alive, and stop there. But from the very beginning, it has been so much more. Just look at the faces here in Quito and sense the mood.
Even the weather has opened and the skies have opened, and that means I think that the people of Quito are happy.
As for Ted Gildred, he says now it's not about him. Time and the generations move on. And indeed, two of his sons, Ted III and Stephen, have already committed to another flight here 25 years from now in what will be Ecuador 4. At least in spirit, you know Ted II and his father, who started everything 75 years ago, will be coming along in 2031 as well.
We just feel that it's extremely important to continue reaching out, a hand of friendship to Latin America.
It has been, after all, their passion and their legacy. All told, Ambassador Gildred, his family and crew, and NBC 739 photographer Dave Smith covered 4,200 miles in 7 days. They met with ambassadors, heads of local municipalities, those kids as you saw, and everyday people too, none of whom will ever forget the flight of Ecuador 3. I'm Ken Kramer. Thank you for coming along too.